This is We Told You So, episode 150. You're going to want to stick around for this because this is all about how we told you for the longest time that a new Trump regime was going to completely take over media and turn it into state-run propaganda. First, let's point out the most hypocritically obvious one. The fact that the MAGA for the longest time have said they're all about free speech, fuck your feelings, free speech. Yet anyone who has said anything even neutral about CK has had their personal information leaked and they've received threats. Because when JD Vance hosted CK's podcast recently, which I guess is something vice presidents do, he encouraged people to leak people's personal information. Why is this important? Well, because he's part of the federal government. And this is essentially the federal government saying that you don't have the right to say what you want to say. This is the federal government issuing punishment for what you say, which is against the Constitution. Yet when Trump was asked how he was holding up after this whole thing, all he wanted to talk about was his new ballroom. And he was playing golf instead of going to Charlie Kirk's vigil. Another example of the federal government stifling free speech would be how they recently pulled Jimmy Kimmel off the air for comments that he supposedly made about Charlie Kirk. What were those horrible comments he made? He said the MAGA are desperately trying to characterize this kid as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. Watch the MAGA free speech people suddenly clutch their pearls. He wasn't even saying anything negative about Charlie Kirk. He was pointing out the MAGA's hypocrisy. But obviously, if Trump is too busy to go to his vigil and is just going and playing golf while constantly saying he's going to use this opportunity to go after left-wing organizations, that's exactly what they're doing, is trying to reframe the narrative and score political points. Because they're desperately trying to do anything they can to paint this conservative kid from a conservative MAGA family who spent all of his time on 4chan and loved Nick Fuentes as somehow a hardcore leftist. And all of this is happening as a fake picture of what they claim is Tyler Robinson, which has been identified as somebody completely different, was wearing a shirt for the Democratic Socialists of America. And they're trying to claim that Tyler Robinson wasn't a conservative, he was a Democratic Socialist. Not only is that picture incorrect, but the actual spokesperson for the DSA said they don't even have anybody named Tyler Robinson in their group anywhere in the country. Yet this is what the MAGA's going with now. So they have to do everything they can to deflect away from it and pretend that somehow he wasn't a conservative. And it doesn't stop there. Because the DOJ just recently deleted a study showing that domestic terrorists are most often right-wingers, which I showed myself with data from the Anti-Defamation League going back since 2016 when Trump first showed up on the scene. Since then, right-wing extremists' murders happen 100 times more often than left-wing ones. In fact, in 2023 and 2024, 100% of extremist murders were done by right-wingers and white supremacists. Yet once again, just like whenever the MAGA attacks somebody, they're like, no, it had to be a Democrat, I think! But if you want to know the glaringly obvious part about this that really brings my piss to a boil, it's because the canceling of Jimmy Kimmel's show came from pressure from the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr. You know who Brendan Carr is? It's the guy who wrote the chapter on the FCC for Project 2025, and it was Trump's pick to lead the FCC on his first fucking day in office. And his whole takeaway on that was that a handful of corporations can shape everything from the information we consume to the places we shop. And in Project 2025, the role of the FCC is to completely control the narrative of what we see in the media. And just a few hours after they canceled Jimmy Kimmel's show, Trump thanked ABC for doing so. This is the federal government unconstitutionally punishing people for their free speech. But now instead, Trump is directing his ire at what he calls Antifa as a terrorist organization. The idiotic thing is that Antifa is not an official organization, and the Republicans are just using Antifa as a boogeyman like George Soros. But since Antifa just means anti-fascist, maybe someone should tell him that if he calls Antifa terrorists, that is by definition him calling himself a fascist. And there's no way out of that. And this should be a big red flag for people, because Antifa just means anti-fascist. You know who the original Antifa were? Your grandparents, risking their lives storming into Normandy to stop the fascist aggression in Europe. So Trump and Vance are saying federally that it's totally fine to release other people's information just for their opinions, say that anybody who issues their opinion should be threatened or fired, says that anybody who issues their opinion should be taken off the air. But what did Trump say on his first day in office?
Of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America.
This has been We Told You So. The fascist MAGA movement is going to be the end of civilization.